my name's Katie Cavera. You might have met me at the Tea Garden Jazz Festival that happens every February. I've been doing that for a number of years. I live in Los Angeles and I work at Disneyland regularly, and I just love the banjo. So we're going to do some banjo videos for you. This first video we're going to do is going to be talking about how we tune the banjo. Now, tuning the banjo, I brought every banjo I have because there's a lot of ways to tune it. So we're kind of going to go over each one. And if you play the banjo already, you may tune it a specific way, or you may be starting to play the banjo and not really sure how to tune it. So hopefully this will shed some light on that too. I'm going to start with my tenor banjo. So this is a tenor banjo, and we know it's a tenor banjo because it has a shorter neck. So the scale of tenor banjo is 17 or 19 frets. The longer neck banjos obviously have a longer neck and a few more frets, but we'll get to those next. The tenor banjo, the standard tuning for a tenor banjo is C, G, D, and A. Now, if you know about intervals, you will notice that those are tuned in open fifths. And it's exactly the same tuning as a viola in the orchestra. So if you have some orchestral experience, you may recognize that as a viola tuning as well. So the nice thing about having the tenor banjo tuned in fifths is you get nice open chords. So if I were to play a C chord, you hear how that it's got this openness to it, this ringing to it. So that's kind of what's a nice thing about the tenor banjo. Also, because it's tuned in fifths, if you play a scale, everything is really symmetrical. So everything is kind of, it's right there under your fingers. It's very symmetrical. The downside of a tenor, at least for someone with small hands like me, is you got to stretch a little more to get some of those chords and play some of those scales. So that is what the tenor banjo sounds like. That is how it is tuned, C, G, D, A. And if you want to listen to someone that's really good at the tenor banjo, you can listen to Harry Reeser, who was just an amazing virtuoso on the tenor banjo. He made some records in the 20s under his own name and with his own orchestra. So you can listen to him, or if you want to listen to somebody that's more just a band rhythm player on the tenor banjo, my absolute favorite is Fred Guy, who played with the Ellington Orchestra. Definitely check him out. Nothing fancy, no big banjo solos, but just an excellent sense of time. And on those early Ellington records where you hear a lot of banjo, like Mood Indigo, or he even played on It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing. They had banjo on that because it's an early song. But the mooch, some of those really early ones, the banjo just comes through really clear. So definitely listen to Fred Guy. And for the more modern players, there's the revival bands out in New Orleans. Lawrence Marrero played tenor banjo with George Lewis and Bunk Johnson and those guys. So tenor banjo is great. I love tenor banjo, nice open tuning. So that's this one. Now I'm going to get a few more banjos because there's other banjos and other ways to tune it. So let me grab my plectrum banjo next. So here's what the plectrum is. This banjo it has the longer neck, right? Much longer than the tenor was. It's got 22 frets, usually thereabout, and it's tuned. Sometimes they call this dropped C tuning. So C, and then an open G chord. G, B, D. So sometimes referred to as dropped C tuning, but this is standard plectrum banjo tuning. Now, the plectrum banjo is used a little more often for chord melody. Now, the chords aren't as, remember the tenor banjo was stretchy, you had to really stretch your hands. These chords are a lot more closer together and a little bit easier under the fingers. So if you have small hands like me, this one might be a little easier to grab onto, but the close chord voicing make it easier to play chord melody. So that's what you often hear on the plectrum banjo. So you can play melodies on your top string and harmonize them with the other three strings. So that is the plectrum banjo. Of course, the big plectrum hero is Eddie Peabody. He was a virtuoso, and you can hear him. He was an entertainer and played fabulous chord melodies. and you can find him on YouTube. He's a good guy to listen to for that. For more rhythm playing of the plectrum banjo, Eddie Condon. Now, everybody thinks of Eddie Condon as a 4-string guitar player in the Chicago Sound, but in his early days when he played with Red Nichols, he played plectrum banjo. So you got to find Eddie Condon with Red Nichols, those early records. I think there's even some YouTube videos you can find, and you'll see him playing his plectrum banjo, and that's great for a band player, more of a revival rhythm section player. For revival players, Pat Patton, I like, with Lou Waters and Turk Murphy. I mean, we talk about the San Francisco Sound sometimes, and that was a big revival movement, like in the 50s, 60s, and you can hear him playing. I mean, so many great plectrum banjo players. Bill Dindal, we love Bill Dindal, well, excellent player, and this is the banjo I play a lot, the plectrum banjo, so I'm a fan. The other options, so we're going to get into a few more obscure options of banjos here. Let me grab my 5-string banjo to show you that, and then we'll talk about other options that are based off of that. So the thing about the 5-string banjo is this banjo's, you know, it's kind of associated with bluegrass, country music, things like that. And a lot of times people, instead of playing it with a flat pick, they play it with finger picks. And the tuning of this banjo is an open G tuning. So D, G, D, then G, there it is, B, D, and then the drone, the high string, is also a G. So what that means is if you strum it, you get an automatic G chord, which makes it really easy. And the finger picking method, we're not going to go into that because these are jazz videos and we're going to talk about that. But the reason I wanted to talk about this banjo is because the 5-string banjo's been around for a long time and may even predate the 4-string banjos. But what happened is that this was being used in theatrical shows like in the 1800s and stuff, and people would often just play it with their fingers. But then when ragtime music came around, they wanted to use the banjo in ragtime bands, and playing with your fingers, it's kind of hard to hear somebody finger picking a banjo with the trumpet and the trombone and all the other instruments going. So people started to flat pick this banjo, which sounds fine, and just playing their chord shapes and playing it, and they realized pretty quickly that, you know, the 5th string wasn't helping a lot because you have to tune it if you're changing keys and doing things like that. So oftentimes they would just take the 5th string off and play this tuning, which is D, G, B, D, the open tuning. Now you'll still find some banjo players to this day that just play 4-string banjo tuned to this open G, and that's fine. That's a legitimate way to do it. It just comes, it's derived from the 5-string banjo. So what happened too is a lot of people that played guitar heard these guys playing banjo in the bands, and they wanted to play banjo as well. So they just tuned their banjo like they would tune the top 4 strings of a guitar, which is D, G, B, E. So the same as the top 4 strings of the guitar. Now, that's useful if you're already a guitar player and you want to play banjo. So you would just play all your same guitar shapes. This is actually the hardest tuning for me to play because I play 6-string banjo, and if I see a long neck banjo, I want to play plectrum tuning, and if I see a short banjo, I want to play tenor tuning. But if this works for you, by all means, you should do this. There are a lot of people and a lot of great guitarists that switch to banjo and just use the same tuning. So if you want to listen to some examples of that, there's a great New Orleans banjo player named Danny Barker out of New Orleans, or he was out of New Orleans, passed away not too long ago. He actually started as a guitarist, and then when he picked up the 4-string banjo, he just tuned it like a guitar. And you'll see him in later videos, he's actually playing 6-string guitar. So let's go ahead and talk about that too. You might have seen 6-string banjos. It's basically a guitar neck on a banjo body. And you would just play it as you play a guitar. Now, my thing about 6-string banjo though is it's its own animal. So you have to listen to people like Johnny St. Cyr, who's an excellent six-string guitar player. There's also Clancy Hayes, who was also with Turk Murphy, more in the revival band setting. You may not know this, but Django Reinhardt actually started on banjo, and there are recordings of him playing banjo in a Parisian cafe with an accordion player. They're great if you can find some of those, and I think you can on YouTube and places. You can hear Django play the banjo. But when you play six-string banjo, you have to treat it like a banjo. And if you listen to those early guys like Johnny St. Cyr, you'll get an idea of what they're going for, and you can kind of mimic that and make it sound more banjo-like. So that's what we're going for, just to get a good banjo sound with the guitar tuning, and it's completely doable. And I think that nearly covers all the tunings. The problem with this historically is sometimes when we hear these guys on the early records playing banjos, it's hard to tell what tuning they're using. There's a great banjo player named Elmer Snowden. There's an album you can get called Harlem Banjo that he plays on. He actually tuned his banjo in fifths, but not tenor banjo tuning. So tenor banjo tuning was C, G, D, A. He tuned his lower, G, D, A, E, still in fifths. And he played a whole record, and that was just professionally how he played. Sounds great. But these weird tunings and things like that pop up. Irish tenor banjo. I know this is a jazz video, but just mental note, Irish tenor banjo is also C, G, D, A, but a fifth up from tenor tuning. So they have to use lighter gauge strings. And I think the reason for that is when it's tuned G, D, A, E, that's the same tuning as a violin. So if you think of Irish fiddle tunes, it would be easy for a fiddle player to transition and play a banjo that way. And I don't know, maybe Elmer Snowden was a violin player. I'd have to look into that. More people know about him than I do, and you can probably get an answer on that somewhere if you're curious. Like I was saying, those early guys, it's really hard to tell what tuning they're playing sometimes. So if people ask me, the big question is, what is the best way to tune a banjo? And my answer is all of them. They all work. I don't care how you tune it, just make it sound like a banjo. And we make it sound like a banjo by listening to some of those old artists and some of those records and copying their style. So if you can get a banjo sound, you can even tune it ukulele as a ukulele. I've heard people do that too. So tuning does not matter, but these are all accepted ways of tuning a banjo. And as you explore the banjo and start to learn it, I hope you find some way that works for you, and we will move on from there talking about chords and other things. But get your banjo, get it in tune, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much.